Have you ever noticed there is a person, one single person, who keeps returning to your thoughts, like the echo of a bell long after it has stopped ringing? You might be washing the dishes, walking alone, closing your eyes before sleep, and suddenly, there they are again. Why? Why does one person occupy space in your inner world? Without permission, without effort, without even being present. To understand this, you must not look outward. You must look inward. When someone keeps appearing in your thoughts, it's easy to believe that it's about them, their presence, their actions, their importance in your life. But the deeper truth is these thoughts return not simply because of who the person is, but because of what remains unresolved within you. The mind does not repeat what is complete, it repeats what is still open, unfinished, or emotionally charged. Every interaction we have leaves an imprint. Some fade naturally, others linger. The ones that linger are tied to emotion, deep emotion. Perhaps it was love that was never expressed, anger that was never voiced, guilt that was never addressed, or closure that never came. These feelings don't vanish with time. They take root quietly in the mind. And over time, they show themselves through recurring thoughts, memories, and imaginations centered around that person. You may notice that the person you keep thinking about might not even be part of your life anymore. They may be distant, unreachable, or even unaware of how often they cross your mind. This shows that their presence in your thoughts isn't because of who they are now, but what they meant to you at a specific moment. The emotional charge attached to that moment is what keeps resurfacing. It's not the person that's haunting your mind. It's the emotion left unresolved within you. The mind is like a pond. When it is still, it reflects the world clearly. But when stirred by emotion, it becomes disturbed, and what rises to the surface are fragments of our inner world. Memories, faces, and stories we haven't made peace with. These fragments return again and again, not to torment you, but to be acknowledged. Every return is a signal. Look here, feel this, understand this. When we do not process an emotional experience, the energy of that experience does not disappear. It simply stores itself, waiting. And the presence of someone in your mind over and over may be the call to face what you've avoided. Whether it's the pain of loss, the longing for connection, or the weight of regret, unresolved emotions create mental echoes. They loop, they replay, not to punish you, but to push you gently toward healing. This is why distraction does not work. Pushing someone out of your mind rarely removes them from your emotional field. You may fill your days with noise, activity, even other people, but at night or in stillness they return. Not because they are stronger than your will, but because they are tied to something deeper. Something that still asks to be seen. What lingers in the mind is a reflection of what the heart has not finished feeling. When emotion is trapped, it searches for resolution, and often it uses the image of a person as the doorway to that emotional release. So their recurring presence in your thoughts is not about them coming in. It is about something inside you trying to come out. When a person repeatedly appears in your thoughts, it is natural to think the focus is on them, their personality, their influence, their actions. But the mind does not operate in such a literal way. It reflects not the external world as it is, but your internal world as it feels. What you continue to think about is not necessarily about the person themselves, but about the inner attachments you've formed in relation to them. These attachments are emotional, energetic, and deeply personal. The mind is not concerned with objective truth. It is concerned with meaning, and meaning is shaped by your inner state. Imagine someone who meant little to you. You met them once, exchanged a few words, and moved on. They do not live in your memory. Why? Because there is no emotional attachment. Now compare that to someone who made you feel deeply. Joy, heartbreak, betrayal, desire. Those emotions become the anchor points around which thoughts start to orbit. The stronger the emotional tie, the more likely that person will return in your mental space. Not because they are physically near or actively involved in your life, but because your mind has stored an internal connection to them. The mind becomes a mirror of that emotional bond. This is why two people can experience the same relationship differently. One may forget and move on. The other may find themselves thinking about it for years. The difference lies in the level of attachment, the stories the mind has built around it, and the personal meaning assigned to that connection. The more significance you give to someone in your inner world, the more space they occupy in your mental one. It becomes less about the person and more about what they represent to you. An ideal, a wound, a need, or a missed opportunity. When the mind reflects these attachments, it is doing its job. It is not betraying you. It is showing you where your energy is still entangled. Thoughts don't repeat because they are random. They repeat because something in you remains emotionally bound. Even negative thoughts, anger, resentment, or longing are signs of inner attachment. They reveal where your sense of self is still linked to a specific experience or person. And so, the person appears again and again in thought, not because they are present in your life, but because they are present in your emotional memory. Often, we believe that time or distance should lessen the recurrence of such thoughts, but time does not resolve what is unresolved internally. You can be thousands of miles away, years apart from a situation, and still think about someone daily. This proves that the mind's attachment is not to the person's physical presence, but to the emotional imprint they left behind. That imprint forms part of your current inner landscape, and until the energy behind that imprint is understood and integrated, the mind will keep reflecting it back to you through memory, fantasy, and thought. When a particular person keeps returning to your mind, it is not always about the person themselves, but more often about what they symbolize to you. Human beings experience life through layers of meaning. We attach significance not just to events, but to the people involved in those events. A person may become a symbol of something much larger. Perhaps a time in your life, an emotional experience, or an aspect of yourself you have forgotten or suppressed. When they return in your thoughts, it is often not because of who they are, but because of what they represent in your inner world. Some people stay in your mind because they awakened a longing you never fully addressed. Maybe they reminded you of how deeply you want to be seen, to be understood, to be loved. Others may return in thought because they triggered a pain you never knew you were still carrying. It could be a parent figure, a former partner, a friend, or even someone who hurt you, and yet their image continues to arise. Not necessarily because you want them back, but because your mind is using their image to point something within you that remains unmet. In this way, the person becomes a mirror, not a mirror of your daily life, but of your inner emotional landscape. They reflect back to you a part of yourself that you may have forgotten, denied, or abandoned. For example, if you keep thinking about someone who made you feel alive, adventurous, or vulnerable, it might be that these qualities are missing from your current life. The thoughts are not just about missing the person. They are about missing that version of yourself. The mind is reminding you of something that is still seeking expression. Sometimes, the person represents a choice you never made, a path you never took, or a version of life that you never lived. They become the embodiment of what if. What if you had spoken your truth, followed your heart, or taken the risk? These thoughts don't persist because it is necessarily important today, but because the story around them holds emotional weight. The human mind seeks completion, and when there is no closure or clarity, it tries to resolve the story in imagination. The person becomes a symbol of possibility, of regret, or of hope unfulfilled. This is why someone can live in your thoughts long after their role in your life has ended. Their image becomes entangled with your own emotional needs, unmet desires, or unresolved chapters. The mind doesn't always distinguish between real connection and symbolic connection. It clings to the form that carried the emotion. And until that emotion is acknowledged and integrated, the person will keep returning. You may try to ignore it, distract yourself, or dismiss it as irrational, but symbols do not vanish through logic. They are emotional placeholders, guiding your attention towards something deeper, something essential that still needs to be seen. When someone continues to appear in your thoughts, it is common to respond with resistance. You may try to push the thought away, distract yourself, suppress the memory, or even become frustrated with your own mind. But what often goes unnoticed is that resistance itself is a form of energy. It is a type of attention, and whatever you give energy to, whether through desire or aversion, your mind will hold on to. When you try to push something away mentally, you are still interacting with it. You are still acknowledging its presence, and in doing so, you reinforce its position in your mental space. This is why the more you try not to think about someone, the more they seem to appear. It becomes a cycle of mental tension. You want relief, so you resist the thought, but the act of resistance keeps the thought active. The mind cannot forget on command. It does not respond well to force. It responds to awareness, understanding, and acceptance. Resistance is a form of inner conflict. It signals that part of you wants to avoid the emotional material tied to the thought. But the more you avoid it, the more your subconscious feels the need to bring it up. There is a principle in human psychology: what you resist persists. It persists because resistance denies natural emotional processing. When a thought or memory arises and you reject it immediately, you're telling your mind that this is something dangerous, something you cannot handle. The mind, in its protective function, assumes that it must continue to bring this to your awareness because it hasn't been resolved. So the cycle continues. You resist, it returns. You resist again, it returns again. And over time this builds more frustration, more confusion, and more emotional entanglement. By resisting, you also assign weight to the thought. You declare silently that this thought matters, and so your mind gives it priority. Just like a wound that is constantly being checked and touched will take longer to heal, a thought that is constantly pushed and pulled will linger longer than necessary. The mind needs stillness to settle, not pressure to perform. Thoughts are like waves. They rise, peak, and fall. But if you tense up every time a certain wave comes, you never allow it to pass fully. You hold it in place through your reaction. In this way, resistance becomes a form of attachment, not in the form of affection or longing, but in the form of emotional charge. And emotional charge is what keeps a thought alive. You may not want the person in your mind, but the resistance is creating an anchor. The mind is not punishing you, it is following the signals you send it. Every time you react strongly, either positively or negatively, you are reinforcing the importance of the thought. The stronger the reaction, the deeper the imprint. And so, resistance, rather than freeing you from the thought, often binds you even more tightly to it. When a thought arises, especially one that brings emotional weight, the natural instinct is often to react. We analyze it, question it, fight it, or try to understand why it has come. But in doing so, we create movement within the mind. That movement becomes friction, and friction gives energy to the very thing we are trying to release. In contrast, when you observe a thought without attachment, without judgment, reaction, or desire, you allow it to pass naturally. You become the witness rather than the participant. This act of observation, done in stillness, is not a passive act but a powerful one. To observe without attachment is to see the thought, acknowledge its presence, and let it continue its course without trying to change it. Just as clouds move across the sky without needing your intervention, thoughts can pass through the mind without you needing to hold them or push them away. When someone appears in your mind repeatedly, you may feel compelled to understand why, to relive moments, or to fantasize about different outcomes. But this constant engagement gives the thought more life than it needs. The moment you stop attaching stories, meanings, or expectations to it, the thought begins to lose its grip. Detachment doesn't mean indifference. It means not clinging. It means allowing the thought to be what it is without assigning it extra value. Often, we attack meaning to certain people or memories because they triggered something deep within us. That emotional response then becomes the glue that holds the thought in place. But if you can simply observe the thought as energy, something that arises and falls like everything else, you break that cycle. You see that the person is not literally in your mind, but rather an echo, a representation of something your inner world once held tightly. This form of observation requires awareness. It means noticing when a thought arises, noticing your instinct to react, and choosing instead to do nothing but observe. In that gap between the thought and the reaction, you create space. And in that space, the mind begins to settle. The thought starts to lose its emotional charge. It no longer controls your attention. It becomes just another movement in the mind's landscape, not the center of your inner world. Most of the suffering created by recurring thoughts doesn't come from the thought itself, but from the way we engage with it. We chase it, fight it, replay it, or try to escape it. All of that activity binds us more closely to it, but observation without attachment is quiet. It does not demand anything, it does not argue, it does not resist, it simply sees. And through that seeing, the energy around the thought begins to dissolve. You may still remember the person, but the thought no longer carries the same weight. The emotional thread weakens, and what once seemed so dominant in your mind begins to fade naturally, not because you forced it, but because you no longer fed it. Peace is not something that appears when the world around you becomes quiet. It arises when the inner world is no longer at war with itself. When someone continues to live in your thoughts day after day, it is often because your heart is still holding on to hope, to regret, to pain, to a version of the past that never found closure. The mind reflects this attachment by replaying memories, images, scenarios, and feelings tied to that person. But the real source of this repetition is the heart's inability to let go. The emotional energy has not yet found its release, so the mind continues to echo it in various forms. Letting go is often misunderstood. Many people think it means forgetting, detaching completely, or pretending that something didn't matter. But true release happens when there is no longer a need to keep the emotional door open. It means you have allowed yourself to feel everything you needed to feel. You've acknowledged the loss, the longing, the joy, the disappointment, without resisting it or clinging to it. When the heart is no longer struggling to make sense of the experience or hoping for a different outcome, it begins to relax, and as the heart relaxes, the mind naturally follows. The constant return of a person in your thoughts is a signal that something is unresolved emotionally. The more unfinished the feeling, the louder the thought becomes. But once the emotional charge is processed fully, something shifts. You may still remember the person, but the memory doesn't carry tension anymore. There's no longer a tight grip, no surge of pain, no flood of longing. The thought becomes neutral. It visits quietly and it leaves quietly. This is the nature of peace, not the absence of thought, but the absence of emotional turbulence. When the heart holds on, the mind becomes restless. It tries to fix, to reimagine, to resolve what the heart is afraid to release. This is why mental overthinking is often just emotional avoidance. The mind is doing the work the heart hasn't finished. But when the heart is heard, when its emotions are truly felt and accepted, the mind no longer needs to keep working. The inner system calms itself. Thought patterns dissolve on their own. You do not need to force forgetting. You do not need to fight the memory. You only need to come to terms with what the experience meant to you, and to honor it fully before allowing it to rest. People leave our lives, but the lessons, the emotions, and the impact they had remain until we digest them. Once they are understood, integrated, and accepted, there is nothing left for the mind to hold on to. The person may still exist somewhere out there, but inside you, their presence is no longer active. It becomes a part of your story, not a loop you're stuck in. And from that space of resolution, peace arises. Not from forgetting, but from no longer needing to remember in the same way.